The National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. has reopened after a breathtaking top-to-bottom renovation. And we're celebrating the voices and achievements of women artists from around the world. Visit now to see Suchitra Matai, Myth from Matter, a new exhibition of richly layered and vibrant paintings, sculptures, and installations that use saris, vintage needlepoints, jewelry, and bindis to imagine a past that lifts up women and people of color. Tickets at nmwa.org. That's nmwa.org.
Today on CityCast DC, starting tomorrow, DC is phasing out its circulator bus routes. And a lot of folks are sad about this, especially our guest, Dan Tangherlini, who launched the service when he ran the city's transportation department. He's going to tell us about how we got here and what might get lost when circulator stops circulating. Today is Monday, September 30th. I'm Michael Schaefer, and here's what DC is talking about. Hey, Dan.
Hi, Michael. How are you?
Good. Thank you for being here.
Oh, my pleasure. Thanks for asking about the circulator.
So you were the head of the District Department of Transportation, that's DDOT to insiders, when Circulator was born. And DC has now officially cut your baby out of its budget.
I know.
It starts getting phased out tomorrow. Why is that happening?
I think in many ways the DC Circulator did what it was supposed to do. It demonstrated that bus service can actually be useful. It can be convenient. Buses can actually be, high quality and attractive vehicles. We were trying to make a point that bus service should be less complicated, more prevalent, easier to get, and more people should use it. So I think the point was made. There's some interesting kind of evolution of the circulator that I think over time doomed it.
For folks who don't know the history of the circulator, I would like to walk us through how we got here. You said it was sort of a model for how buses ought to work, but when exactly did it come into be and why?
Yeah, that's a great question. So in 1997, the National Capital Planning Commission, or NCPC, did a study about downtown, how to activate downtown, how to improve circulation downtown, how to overcome challenges with parking and downtown being overrun with tour buses. And one idea that was kicked around by NCPC, the emerging downtown bid, was this idea of a circulator, a bus that moved about downtown, around the mall, around destinations that visitors would like to go to. And the thought was that there needed to be some level of transportation access to circulate people around the traditional tourist destinations. In 2000, I had the honor and pleasure of leading the effort to start the Department of Transportation. The downtown DC bid had begun to grow. The Georgetown bid had been running something called the Blue Bus, which was a connection from the Roslyn Metro and the DuPont Circle Metro to get people to Georgetown, make it easier for people to get to Georgetown. And the confluence of those kind of three events led to a discussion that said maybe we should activate this NCPC idea. How would that look? What flavor would it take? And so in 2005, we launched with two routes. One route was Union Station to Georgetown, and the other route was the Convention Center to the Southwest Waterfront. Those were the two first routes.
Yeah, it's interesting. I'm a city kid. I travel a lot. I always like to take public transportation when I go places. And you go to a new city, you can get around on their subway. It's pretty easy. But buses, man, it's, buses in a strange city throw you, and you look at a sign and it says L2, 42, whatever. And you don't know. So when Circulator launched and it was like, this is the Georgetown Union Station bus. And exactly what it's doing.
Oh, there's so many different things to unpack there. I had the incredible pleasure of having the chance to spend a week every summer in Copenhagen. My mom was from Denmark, and we would go there and visit my family in the summers. And when I was like 11 or 12, my great aunts gave me a bus pass and said, go and learn the city. And what was interesting was, the buses they were big, they were open, they had back windows so you could see out, you could see in. They had destination names on them. And so that was one of the things I walked away with as just an impression that was burned in early, was this idea that buses did not have to be mysterious. But in DC, the buses were, the WMATA was actually cobbled together from a bunch of bus companies that went broke in the 70s. So they all had their own naming conventions. They also inherited the old Capital Traction streetcar system. So it had its own naming conventions. And then, there's this theory in bus operations that, the longer you make the route, the more destinations you can hit, in theory, the less equipment you need. But what happens is as you make those routes longer and longer, the headways get further and further apart because more things happen along that route. So we had this idea like, well, could we shorten the routes up? Could we start them in places that people recognize, end them in places that people recognize? Instead of having schedules, which I used to joke as a list of times the bus wouldn't come, could we have headways, every 5 minutes originally, then every 10 minutes? And can we charge people something that they might actually be carrying around in their pocket, like an actual dollar, rather than $1.56 or whatever, whatever the bus rates were at the time? And so those were some of the ideas. The idea of borrowing from the theory of bus rapid transit, the notion of having multiple entry points, the possibility of being able to pay in multiple places on the bus. The idea of having a back window that you could actually see through, so you could actually see there were people in there, made the bus a little more welcoming and more friendly. And then painting them a cool color that said, hey, I'm a bus, I'm okay. You can get on me, I'm not scary.
So when you guys launched this, there was a lot of conversation about tourists, but before long, a lot of residents, a lot of, the taxpayers who pay your salary started using it. What were some of the changes over the 25 years that...
I don't think we originally intended it for it to be exclusive use of tourists. In fact, the original ideas of moving the tourists around, to be frank, were mousetrapped by the Park Service, who wouldn't let us stop on the mall. They had a concessionaire called the Tourmobile, and they said, look, the concessionaire is the only one entitled to stop at the mall and stop at National Park Service sites. That was a very, very different service. I think at the time, we're talking about the early 2000s, it probably cost $30 or $40 to get on the Tourmobile. And so we were thinking about just something that moved people around. And we were really excited about the idea that here would be a frequent headway, high quality, attractive service that would be unintimidating to the uninitiated, the tourist, but also incredibly welcoming and helpful for downtown workers. The idea to make it possible for people to buzz over to Georgetown to get lunch was, kind of revolutionary in its day. So we knew pretty quickly that this was going to be something that would appeal. What we were really struck by was it suddenly appealed to people who had never ridden the bus before. We did surveys early on. And when we asked people, have you ridden a bus before? And they're like, no, not really. They were just rail people. There used to be kind of this dichotomy between rail people and bus people. And we're breaking down that barrier. And hopefully by doing that, exposing more people to the massively incredible transportation options that exist in the city. I think in DC, you're never more than a quarter mile from a bus station, which is pretty amazing.
The thing is, though, that from the early aughts to now, there's been this whole other revolution going on, which I don't think is unrelated to what's wound up happening with Circulator, right? In those days, when you launched, there wasn't Uber and Lyft and car share. There wasn't scooters everywhere. I don't remember where chronologically the bike shares came in, but it was, I think it was pre-bike share. So right now, there is all of this kind of soft infrastructure that is out there that didn't used to exist, which means for anybody, whether you're like a tourist visiting a new city or, a downtown office worker who's used to a certain metro route and suddenly wants to go get lunch someplace else, you have options that you didn't used to have. So did the rise of all these other options contribute in some way to either a declining demand for Circulator or towards city budget makers being more willing than they might otherwise have been to cut Circulator loose?
The flip answer is yes and no. I think that The ultimate answer on transportation has to be, the theory of improv, which is yes and. A Uber trip to Georgetown for lunch is going to cost you $20. A circulator trip is, a buckish. So there's got to be some options that preserves the ability for people of varying means to be able to have access to mobility. And people who have varying time sensitivity.
Right. And not everybody, works in an office where you can show up looking sweaty after you've ridden your bike back from lunch.
Yeah, well, that's the other thing. And on a day like today, as avid a biker as I am, it's rainy out there, and that's a hard move to make if you're wearing a suit. So I also think, one of the things that dramatically changed is the notion of office workers. How many people are downtown? Where do people move? I think a lot of things have changed. And so in a sense, I don't begrudge the budget people making the budget decision to say maybe this isn't the best use of scarce resources. I just want to make sure that there is the kind of forward-thinking, lean-in experimentation that we were doing back then still happening now in terms of what kind of transportation options are we going to provide people.
Let's be real, lawsuits are not fun, but with Paulson & Nace, at least they're a little easier. Paulson & Nace is a DC law firm in every sense of the word. It was founded here in 1979. Partner Chris Nace is a local who cares deeply about the DC community, even serving on the board of the local branch of the Living Classrooms Foundation in his free time. Nace and his associates Samantha Peters and Maya Perry handle medical malpractice, wrongful death, and other complex injury cases. And they don't just settle every case. They'll go to court. They'll fight for you. Paulson & Nace has even been recognized as one of U.S. News' best law firms. So if you have been hurt or lost a loved one because of someone else's mistake or negligence, call Paulson & Nace for a no-obligation consultation. Visit www.paulsonandnace.com. That's PAULSONANDNACE.com. Or call 202-463-1999.
The National Museum of Women in the Arts in Washington, D.C. has reopened after a breathtaking top-to-bottom renovation. And we're celebrating the voices and achievements of women artists from around the world. Visit now to see Suchitra Matai, Myth from Matter, a new exhibition of richly layered and vibrant paintings, sculptures, and installations that use saris, vintage needlepoints, jewelry, and bindis to imagine a past that lifts up women and people of color. Tickets at nmwa.org. That's nmwa.org.
So when the administration announced that they were going to cut this out of the budget, there was probably unsurprisingly some backlash against that. Now, I'm an old newspaper editor. I know that when you kill a cartoon strip or something, you hear very loudly from like the 100 people who liked it, and exactly. You don't hear from the 10,000 people who didn't read it. So I don't want to over stress what people were mad about, but what's your sense of how people responded to it being shut down?
Yeah, well, I mean, this wasn't 100 people reading that odd 45th, cartoon. There were millions of riders a year. I was kind of blown away, when we were originally told no one's going to ride this thing. So I think what you heard was there were a lot of people that kind of liked the service. They liked the buses. There was experimentation with the equipment. The first electric buses in DC were circulator buses. The first 3-door buses were circulator buses. But I think over time that had even begun to kind of drift away. We experimented with fares. The Mayor Bowser had the fare shot, the zero. That was the first experimentation with no-cost transit, which I thought was exciting. So I think there was a lot of people who liked the fact that it was a platform that was experimenting with this idea of bus-based mobility, and maybe they're sad about that. There are people who relied on it. They jumped on this route to go there, and now they had to go on a D6 or a 32 or whatever it was. They had to figure that out.
You mentioned downtown office workers. We've talked about visitors. Is there any particular other demographic that has relied on this who's going to be left out in the cold or neighborhood?
I think a lot of service workers. I think these buses went to places where service workers lived or service workers worked. And, I think that there is that's an important responsibility of bus-based transit service, is getting to the places where the trains don't go. The trains tend to go to places where prices are higher for living. Prices tend to get driven up around train stations. It's a natural kind of economic impact. And so the bus service is the great equalizer. It's the great opportunity extender. And I think that's been one of the aspects of the circulator service that was providing a higher quality service for service workers to get to those jobs that we all rely on to provide, the quality of life that we really embrace as urban dwellers.
So just so folks know who might be ambling out to catch a circulator tomorrow morning, what does phasing out actually mean? What do they say the next 3 months are going to look like?
Well, that's a great question. I mean, I think they're going to start shutting down individual routes. And I know that there was a recently issued plan for maintaining at least one of the routes under WMATA operation. But I think that they're, at some level, still figuring out what phasing out was going to look like.
So you mentioned that Metrobus might pick up that Roslyn, Georgetown, downtown route. But it struck me that you said some of the things you were saying were unique about Circulator when you launched, right? Multiple entry points, brighter buses. Metrobus now has multiple entry points. You can pay at the back door, and the buses are brighter, and so on. Which is just, I don't know if this is to Circulator's credit or if this is just a general trend in the bus world. But what are some of the things you think are, non-circulator bus system ought to change, work on, tweak in order to be more useful and maybe make more money?
I actually think the circulator bus drove changes in the U.S. transit bus market overall. I mean, when we bought the Van Hool buses, these were European buses, we were making a statement about the relative quality of customer presentation of the bus. And what you've seen is a change in the way buses are built, the way they are laid out. I think the idea of making much more logical routes needs to come into the bus service and scheduling and design discussion. And it may mean having shorter routes. It may mean having more people changing, what happens is the one person who rides the route from one end to the other tends to, be the one who comes to the meeting. If the route's going to get changed, then people are like, well, I don't want to do that to that person. But what that would do is dramatically improve reliability. It might require more equipment, which is what, the budget people are concerned about. But really, we're not asking the question, like, what is the equipment out there to do, period, right? If we drive up ridership by increasing convenience, by increasing reliability, by reducing time, then, that equipment's kind of, being justified. And I think what we've done is we've just inherited these long, complicated routes that are tied into these funding formula that ignore what all of it exists for, and that's to provide high quality, low cost, environmentally friendly transportation to people who need it.
So kind of more troubling, there was, I think, 270 odd circulator workers last week protesting their layoffs. What happens to them? Is there a plan to integrate them into Metro, or are they in a tough spot?
I'm not exactly sure what's going on there, but I know from being the former interim general manager at Metro, we were always struggling at finding bus drivers. So if there are 270 highly qualified, experienced bus drivers, it does not seem like that would be a huge problem to solve. Because unless things have dramatically changed, I'm pretty sure Metro needs bus drivers. The interesting thing is, in order to drive a Metro train, you actually have to have been a bus driver before. That was the agreement with the union. And so we were always short train drivers. And the reason why we were short train drivers is we didn't have enough bus drivers. It was this huge cascade to suddenly have 270 qualified bus drivers show up on your doorstep. That seems like an incredible gift. And that might actually have tremendous benefits to the ability to fill vacancies on the rail side, as well as fill out the rest of the bus side. So it seems like more of an opportunity than a problem, but I'm just saying that from from where I sit. I'm not right in the middle of it.
Is there anything else that's being irrevocably lost here?
I'm sad to see the Circulator brand, the name, the bus. It was really something to see it go from this giant question mark and a bunch of people challenging the notion. We had a congressional hearing where some, bus lobby people got together to try to fight the creation of the Circulator. I'm still not clear why, but we did. To see it go from that to being, featured on postcards, essentially, to, featured on images of the city. It was one of the things that made the city distinctive and unique. To lose that is sad. I'm not sure what the replacement is for people who are showing up in town and want to figure out a way to get around. It would be nice if there were some simplified branded routes that addressed what we had when we had the Circulator. So,
well, and Metro is talking about a total remapping, which would presumably make the routes a little easier to explain, if nothing else.
Well, it's funny. I remember back when I was on the Metro board and we had the year of the bus. So it's a little bit like Infrastructure Week, I think. The desire to do something with the bus, the minute you start diving into it, you realize how complicated it is and people start backing away. I think people should run to it because I think that there's tremendous opportunity in rationalizing, modernizing, generally improving bus service, because it is the secret service. It is the key to real equitable mobility, I think, in the city and in the region.
So last day of service, you're going to take a ride?
I would love to. I'm going to ride that one more time for sure. It was exciting to ride it the first time. I think it's fair to go ride it the last time. And as I said in the article I did for Greater Washington, I think the Circulator did what it was supposed to do. The fact that we're having this conversation, the fact that we've so dramatically changed our perceptions about micromobility, mobility options. I'm proud of the Circulator's near 25 years run.
Dan, thank you so much for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. I really appreciate it.
And that is all for today here on CityCast DC. If you enjoyed the show, why not tell a friend, rate the show, leave us a review, and subscribe to our morning newsletter. We'll be back tomorrow morning with more news from around the city. Bye.